Good morning everybody. Finally getting around to making another video. I'm hoping the videos I'm going to do from now on are going to be much better, because you may have noticed from some of them that not that necessarily the content wasn't good, but it's perhaps the way that I had read it. It was somewhat very unnatural because I was sort of reading it in some of them, and I'm just trying to get away from that altogether and just tell you just from my own mind, as if I'm talking to you directly about what I've discovered and what I think about various things. And this channel is really about trying to help each other and the things I've discovered through using psychedelics, but not always just on psychedelics. I mean, that's been a big part of it. It allows you to get to a greater depth if you're thinking and analysis. And I mean, there is a benefit to, I suppose, we'd say LSD with helping with depression. That's that is very true. But this channel, I'm really hoping that you will get some benefit out of other things that I've just discovered anyway through reading, say, philosophy, various philosophies. And today I'm going to be talking about anxiety and how I've come to work with it, to deal with it, to accept it, I suppose, and in some ways overcome it tremendously. And one of the biggest ways that I've sort of come to deal with it is, and it's not just with anxiety, I've realized this with, say, depression, paranoia and anxiety, is that there's something that I would say they are symptoms that are based on a type of way of thinking that's based on either the future, the present, or the past. So in terms of anxiety, I think that is a focus of thinking about the future, and it causes us a tremendous amount of stress, because what I've learned through reading various philosophies is you understand that the future doesn't exist, and that's very true. And what I have found is that a lot of my thinking, and even if I look back in the past about perhaps what I thought was going to happen in the future, say up till present day, a lot of those things either never happened, or they didn't happen the way I think they did, or if they did, perhaps they often weren't as bad as I thought they would be. So that's one aspect, but it's not the main aspect, but it's a very important one, because through, say, for instance, I learned through Zen, part of an offshoot of the Mahayana Buddhism, is that they tried to live in the present moment all the time. And at first I thought, well, perhaps they're just trying to escape their own problems, but I mean, it certainly has that effect, but it's not really the point. I mean, that's one aspect anyway of Zen, but it's not the entire thing. But what you realize is the only thing that really does exist is what's happening to you right now. All the things in the future, look, you might be worrying about something in the future, and it may happen, but most likely, if you think about it through your entire life, it most likely won't. And what are you going to do about it anyway? If it is going to happen, then worrying about it's not going to change it. And if you can change it, well, then you can change it, and then there's nothing to worry about. So I know it sounds sort of simple, maybe too simple perhaps, but that is one aspect. But the greater thing than that, though, is that sort of way of thinking is, yes, to be present, but also to sort of not attach yourself to your fears, because all the things I mentioned before, well, maybe it's not all of them, but at least the paranoia and the anxiety I've recognized a type of fear. And in terms of the anxiety, that's a fear of the future, a fear of what you think is going to happen to you. I mean, if you are 100% present, you really can't be afraid of what's happening, because you know what's happening, and that thing you're thinking about is not happening. It's always a thing of the future. So that is definitely one of the main aspects to bring yourself back from that. The other thing that I found very helpful is through breathing. Again, I've learned an awful lot through Zen with this, and not just Zen, but the idea of breathing. And you may have heard perhaps when people have panic attacks that they will say, okay, breathe. And look, I think there is some benefit in that in many ways. But in my opinion, particularly in terms of my own anxieties, that I never really found that particularly helpful. And it's not that it can't be helpful. I think that when we're being told, or at least when I've been told by various doctors or other health people or whatever, that they don't really understand what you're trying to do. So the aspect of that I've learned through, say, Zen, particularly, I learned a lot from Zen, is that you focus tremendously on your breathing. And the point of this breathing, in my view, and it's sort of this idea is developing more and more all the time, is that by focusing on the breathing, you're sort of clearing your mind temporarily. Not always. You're not always being in a state of a blank mind. There is a benefit for that, though, at times having a blank mind. But you're focusing on the breathing because that way you're sort of taking yourself away from your own thinking. But it seems to be much more than that. It seems to me that the brain has all this stuff going on, which can be helpful to us, but often not very helpful to us. And what you're trying to do is, by the breathing, is get in control of yourself. And in my opinion, I think that the breathing is the control center for the body, and more than the brain. I mean, I know technically, yes, we do know about how the brain works and all that, sending signals and that through, all the different neurons and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not talking about in that aspect, in the scientific. I'm talking about that when you learn to breathe, calmly and comfortably, not in a forced way, not in a deep breath in and deep breath out sort of way, or vice versa, or whatever, but just focus on just a calm, steady breathing, almost like a sort of rhythm. It feels almost like you're aligning yourself with something, almost like aligning yourself with yourself. I don't know, but when you start to get that aspect of just this natural calm breathing, but you're focusing on it, just allowing it in and out, but you're not trying to breathe in more than your lungs can take or exhale harder than you can. It's not, there are breathing techniques for that, obviously, and they have their own benefits, I suppose, in many ways, but I've found that that's not the way. It really is about calmness. And so forcing your breathing is actually not being in control. So being in control is focusing on your normal sort of breath and being calm about it. And it's amazing when you do get this skill down, when you focus back on your breathing, away from the thinking of the future in terms of anxiety. It makes a very big difference. And I know people obviously have all sorts of different anxieties that trigger them off into that state. And one of the ones that I used to have tremendously, that used to really get to me very badly, was a fear of being homeless. I get very anxious about that. And the reason I would get that is because, well, there are many aspects, I suppose, but one of them was I've always rented all my life. I haven't ever bought a house. And through my renting, I've often had to leave the homes I've been in, or houses or whatever, because the people who were selling the house or who owned the house were selling it, and the people who were buying it wanted to move in. So then I would have to find another place, and and that would often be quite challenging, because it was hard to find rental places a lot of the time, and particularly when I stopped working full time due to my mental condition. It was too stressful, really, and it wasn't really by choice to begin with at all. It was just due to some very bad psychosis and various other things that had happened, and it was only through my psychiatrist really pushing that I really need to rest and to take a break and not work so much. And I do enjoy doing things. I do an awful lot of things, but it was the stress aspect, I suppose, of the type of work I did too. So anyway, when you're not you don't have a full-time job and you're looking for a rental place, it's very challenging, and that was often causing a lot of problems for me in terms of thinking I'm going to be homeless. And even though I'm renting now, even not very long ago, I used to say last year, I used to get very, very afraid of that too. I had absolutely shockingly bad anxiety about it, and it was to the point where then it would start to cause paranoia. Then the paranoia would feed on the anxiety, and then it was just a big mess. So with the anxiety, I've spoken so far about bringing yourself out of the future, which is a good thing, because I don't know if I'll ever be homeless. If I just fantasize about it, I let my brain to do that, I'm not helping myself. That's not happening right now, is it? That's something that could happen, but it might not. So why am I worrying about that? I'm not saying you should never really plan for things, but the thing is, though, I've realized through life is that you can't always really plan for anything. You can do the best you can, but things can still be thrown at you in a certain way, or things can go wrong that you just couldn't prepare for. That's another aspect as well. But so to overcome my anxiety, I learned through Zen about becoming back to the present, and I learned about the breathing aspect, which was very, very helpful too. But also what I did was, when the fears would come up, and a lot of people do this, I've noticed, they'll say they're afraid of something, but there's no analysis of it, no analysis of the fear, about what it's really about, and really to get to the bottom of it. And not just to get to the bottom of it, but actually really visualize it, visualize what you're afraid of. And I think I've heard a term now called negative visualization. It's a thing I'd actually said, but I think it actually is something, it actually is a term, because I actually have heard about it since. So what I would do is, for instance, I would think about what it would be like to be homeless. Imagine I'd lost everything, and and then what am I going to do? And by doing that, just visualizing that, and I do that regularly actually still, I've actually found a real peace about it, because, and I don't really know exactly how I've got there. I think it's through doing this technique, but it's not just that. I think it's also through a lot of reading I do, and I think particularly as well to do with the Stoic philosophies. And I'll come back there in a second. So yeah, I would think about all the things that I could think of that were terrible and what's so terrible. And funnily enough, the fear would actually, after a while, just sort of went away altogether. And I think the reason for that is that I actually don't really feel afraid about things anymore. I'm not afraid of death. And even in dangerous situations, of course, I don't want to be hurt or attacked. But I don't know, it's a really weird sort of mindset that I've been able to get to. And it's like a calmness. And so in this video, I'm really just talking about the different sort of things that I've done. There may be more things that I've done to get to this sort of state of mind, but it's a great calmness. And I certainly try to deliberately unnerve myself all the time to see if I really do feel this calm. And I do. So in terms of the Stoic philosophers, most of them sort of look at the same sort of thing about life, is that, you know, nothing is really good or bad. I mean, in life, it's really just how you look at it, how you think about it. And I know a lot of people might think, oh, that's not true. But I think it is. And also, if things are happening that you aren't under your control, which is often the case, then getting upset about things or angry about things, well, it's not really changing anything. So you just accept it. That's just the way things are. And the Stoics aren't just the only people who looked at it that way. I mean, a lot of Eastern philosophers look at it like that too, that there is, you know, like the Taoist is idea of everyone's just in the Tao. And if you think about it as an analogy of being in a big river, you're in the river and it's just swishing around all over the place, and you can swim hard against it, but you're still in it. You're just swimming hard, and you're making things hard for yourself. And people do that in life all the time. They make things hard for themselves. So why keep swimming so hard against it? Just go with it. And because there's not really a lot you can do, you know, until that, you know, perhaps hard part of the river passes. And I mean, you can see this in Zen as well. They've got a similar idea that, and again, they just bring themselves back to the present. And there is actually, I remember reading about a story about how in the early Zen monasteries, when somebody would first join, they generally put them on domestic duties, perhaps not always. I think maybe in perhaps one teaching or something. And one of the things that they would do is perhaps do kendo, but the new person wouldn't do that. And what the master would do from time to time, they would just run up on this new person when they weren't looking and just crack them on the head with a stick and sort of just start attacking them. And that person, that student, would have to defend themselves. And this would happen over time, just spontaneous moments. The teacher would just, or the master would just jump out of nowhere and just start attacking them. And then the student would realize wherever they are at that point in time, they would just have to grab whatever they had just to defend themselves from the attack. And what the student would finally realize is that there was really no way to prepare yourself for the attack. And that's kind of what life is like, is that there's really no way to prepare yourself for things that might go wrong or bad. There's just really not a lot you can do except for the way you think about them. And this is a part of why people get very anxious about things, because there's almost like they have a feeling like perhaps they could have some control, or they realize perhaps they don't have any control and they're not accepting that. So it's almost like a fear of, or the anxiety is based off the fear of not being able to accept that you don't have any control. And the funny thing is you don't. I've noticed that throughout life, people are looking for certainty in life when there really is none. There's no security. There's always a false sense of it. People think if I work harder, I make more money, then I'll be secure, then I'll have such certainty. But that could go. There could be a war. There could be anything that could happen. I mean, what if you lose your limbs? You know, there could be so many things. You could think of, you know, millions of things probably if you just start to really, you know, get really obscure with ideas of what could happen. But it really is the life experience. And I think the problem why this is such a problem for people in life, my view, is that throughout our lives, from a young age, I'd say it's an indoctrination, and I think a lot of other people would agree with that through our lives, through the schooling system we begin. But one thing we do sort of learn is what I call a societal narrative of this is what you do and then your life will be great. But it doesn't really go like that at all, and a lot of people believe that it is. I mean, some people might call it the American dream or the Australian dream or whatever dream you want to call it. You could call it that. But for example, you know, there's the idea that you go to school, you finish high school, perhaps you go to university, which is something a lot of people do now. And then after that, you might get a job in your field, which often doesn't happen. But, you know, just go along. This is how generally people seem to think. And then they'll, you know, meet a nice, you know, man or woman. And then they might get married and have kids and have a house. And then, you know, their kids will have grandkids and the life will just be wonderful. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm sure it does. But the thing is, there's this idea of this linear sort of narrative that if you do all these things, then you'll be happy and everything will be great. But it doesn't go like that for a lot of people, and a lot of people have a very hard life in terms of that, despite their best efforts. They suffer from it because they feel, well, I've been trying very, very hard to do all these things and it's not working out. The worst case of that, obviously, when people feel that it's not working out, is they take their own lives. So I'm sort of getting a little bit off track here, but yeah, I think that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from too, is societal pressures. I mean, there's so many different types of anxieties people get. I was just talking about my one aspect of the anxieties I used to get tremendously was about the homelessness, and I think a lot of people do get that, and that's why it's so hard and do all these sort of things for fear of that. But this is one thing I learned though through the Buddhists, for instance, is that it's through attachment that you really do suffer. So if I'm attaching myself to having a roof over my head like a house, and I don't have one, and I think I need one to be happy or content, then I'm creating my own suffering. It's all sort of self-imposed in a sense. And that does create a tremendous amount of anxiety, because even if it hasn't happened, the thought of it happening creates anxiety and suffering, because I mean, it is a type of suffering. So I've been really working on that, is to try and detach myself from things as much as possible. This might even sound very, very cold. I've even tried to do that to a degree with people I love and care about, and it does sound very cold, but I don't mean that in a way to sound that. I'll explain what I mean by that, because I had a tremendous anxiety too about my wife when we were together, about losing her in my life, because she meant so much to me, and we were codependent, which wasn't very good. But we've been separated for quite a long time now, and we still know each other, and our relationship's much better. But anyway, getting off sidetrack. So I had a lot of anxiety about that, just tremendous. Like I wasn't going to be able to cope. It was the fear of the loss, the anxiety about that. What I sort of found though was that yes, I was creating my own suffering, but also it came down to the idea that I needed her. I needed her. And that's really not a great thing to have in your life about people you love and care about, is to feel that you need them. I want them in my life. And there's a very big difference in this. And at first it sounds a little cold, but it's not. So for instance, if I go around saying to somebody, I can't cope with myself, so I need you there to distract myself from myself, that's not really great for the other person. I mean, if somebody's saying, I just need you around, well, I'd prefer someone to want me around. And it's likewise with people I love and care about in my life now. I want to spend time with them. I don't need to spend time with them. I enjoy the time I spend with them very much. But there's a big difference there. And that really does come from a big part of the anxiety too, is that fear of the loss. I said anxiety can be about all sorts of things, and I've had a tremendous amount of my life of anxiety, which I'm really getting some kind of sovereignty over now, which is fantastic. And the other thing I want to say, just to talk about loss, is often there's a benefit in loss too, whatever it might be. This is the idea of polarities in life, that you can't have one without the other sort of thing. Because if you don't have one, if you only do have one, then the other one's not there, the opposite's not there, then neither of them can manifest. So if you say, I just want to be happy all the time, but you don't know sadness, well, if you're always in a constant state of happiness, then you'd never know you're happy. It would just be the normal state. That's the one sort of example. So in terms of the loss, there is also a gain. And the extreme of this, and some people might say, oh, well, what about, when you lose someone you love? Well, again, this might sound a little cold, but in the loss of a loved one, there can still be a tremendous amount of gain, because you might gain more independence. You may have never lived with anyone before, and you might learn that you enjoy cooking, or you're very good at it, and you might not hold you back so much because maybe the other person held you back in some way. I mean, there's so many things, and I'm not saying, I'm not taking away the idea of the loss and the grief in that. No, I'm not saying that, but it's also about the focus. Going back to the idea of focusing on your breathing, focusing on the present. The same thing with focusing on the right aspects of life, so you don't make it so hard for yourself. So rather than focus on all the negative stuff, try and focus on some of the positive stuff too. More on the positive if you can, rather than negative. But generally speaking, with the anxiety, I actually have written some things down, and I'm just going to try and find what I've got here, because I didn't want this to be a sort of red thing like I have done with some of my other videos, because it sounds very red, and it's probably it's not a nice thing to hear, I don't think, when you're sort of listening to something like this. So I've got lots of books and pieces of paper everywhere, so I'm just having a look here. I sort of made a comment of this just before about, I actually wrote this back on the 11th of this month, is that people are so uncomfortable with uncertainty, so always looking for certainty in life, but there is none. And I sort of mentioned that before, and I think that's where a lot of anxiety does come from. But also, I'm just trying to find here. Well, one of the things I would like to just say, actually, which probably relate to an awful lot of people, and this is actually something I found I've gotten over, which I actually almost forgotten about, was an anxiety that a lot of people have, is a sort of social anxiety around others, to not be free to be yourself, to do what you want to do. You're concerned about what other people think. And I read in a book called The Tao Te Ching, which is written by Lao Tzu, to form the Taoist sort of philosophy. And I've never forgot about this. I've actually got it written up on my fridge. It meant so much to me when I read it. And he said, if you care for others' approval, then you'll be their prisoner. And a lot of people do that in life. They're so concerned about what other people think, and it creates a tremendous amount of anxiety for them. You know, it might be the way they look, why they, how much money they have. It could be lots of things. And when you let all that go, through, again, it's an attachment. It goes back to the Buddhist thing. It's an attachment to what other people think. When you let all that go, and it's a process. I can't really point out one thing that I've done particular to get me to this state, but I just don't care anymore. And you can clearly see it by if you look at my car. It looks like an Indian taxi. I've got like tassels hanging around, and like beads on the ceiling, and like there's flowers everywhere, and it's painted it. And it's funny because I live in a country place, and a lot of men actually think I might be gay. And I'm not concerned. I just don't care. I've realized that I don't need to defend myself against people's thoughts or words, because as I said, it goes back to this idea of I can't control what people say or think. But I accept that they are going to think terrible things about me. But by doing that, it's a great thing. As I said, it's like a optimistic pessimism about the world. I just accept that people are going to have these sort of attitudes. I mean, you can see people who are bitter in the world all the time for whatever reason. It reminds me of a thing I actually heard once before, that when you look at someone's face, that a sour face comes from sour thoughts. And I think that's very, very true. I actually saw another video just the other day with, what's his name, Wayne Dyer. He's talking about his book, The Erogenous Zone. So I haven't read that, but I remember seeing it when I was a kid, actually. My mum, I think, had that book somewhere. And I think when I was a kid, when I saw it, I thought it was some sort of sexual thing. But anyway, that's a book I'd be interested in reading. But anyway, he was sort of, I'm trying to think what he was saying. Sort of losing my train of thought about that now, but he's a very good person anyway to sort of listen to. But yeah, sorry, he was alright. That's what he was saying. He was sort of talking about similar things to what I was saying, about that he sort of goes through life expecting, negative thoughts and that from everybody. He just accepts it, expects it even, and I do too. And it's funny because, funnily enough, by doing that in a positive way though, not a negative way, it's actually a really liberating thing, and it really frees you up. Anyway, going back to my car, I remember at one time I was at the timber yard here that I go to, and the owner was there one day. I speak to him every now and then, and my car's always a little bit different, and I painted it with these sort of Celtic things that I've drawn on my car and painted. But he said to me one day, he said, I understand all the painting and stuff. That's that makes sense. But he said, but what about all the flowers and stuff in the car? He said, and I just said to him, I said, well, what could be more manly than doing something like that and then not caring what anyone else thinks? And he laughed and he said, yep, good point. And that's true. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, I'm not going to live my life trying to worry about other people. And if you can get to that state of mind, I said, I really can't just pinpoint one thing I've done to get there. It's through a tremendous amount of reading. Contemplation would be a big part of it, definitely. And meditation is that I often sit a lot in silence. Nothing on, no music, nothing. Just even when the lights go out, because I've got them on a timer, I'll sit there in the dark, eyes closed, just sometimes with a blank mind, sometimes thinking about things. And through doing that and following my fears and all sorts of things all the way through, all the things that make me suffer, I get curious about, and then I take them right through to the as far as I can, and then I keep working on this. And that's why, so using LSD helps a lot with that, because I can really get down to the nitty gritty. And it's amazing when you use something like that to really get down into your own mind. It can be very confronting at first, but now I've experienced so much, I'm not surprised by anything I see down there in my own mind. So that's an interesting thing. I'm just having a look here just quickly, because I'm probably going to end this video up now. You see if there's anything else I was going to mention to do with anxiety. So I've got my pieces of paper here at the moment. I said I wasn't going to read off them, but I can't say anything that's jumping out at me at the moment. I think I've sort of gotten to some of the key things. I might come back to this idea in the future if I've got some more to add. But essentially, just summing it up, if you're finding you're suffering in any kind of way, look at your thinking and always bring yourself back to the present way of thinking. And if you need to, even just blank your mind as best you can. I know it's a hard thing to do, but bring yourself back to the present, because all that's happening is right now. That's it. The past is gone and the future hasn't happened, and it most likely won't even happen how you imagine it. So just let that idea go. And it takes practice. That's the whole thing with these things. It's not going to happen quickly necessarily. It's a practice. You're disciplining your own brain. And that's one thing I've also realized, is that discipline's not a bad thing, as some people might think. We often, discipline children. I'm not talking about in terms of hitting them. I mean, you have a discipline like, okay, you're going to bed at 7:30 at night, and you have that sort of thing. But as adults, we seem to lose that aspect of the importance of discipline in ourselves, and particularly our own brains, not allowing it to think about certain things. And I'm not talking about hiding from things, but there's a way to go about things and work through things. Like as I said, I do that negative visualization, and I contemplate an awful lot and think things through, and I confront my problems. I don't run away from them, but I also keep my brain in check, and I've learnt different techniques to say, well, this is not a helpful way of thinking. Thinking about the future is not helpful, so I'm not going to do it. And as soon as I realize it, and I still do it, it's my brain, but I'm getting better at it. You see, that's the point, through practice. And I bring myself back to, as I said, to the present, and some people might call back to center even. Same with the past. I try not to dwell on the past at all. I bring myself back. So that's one thing. Then there's the breathing. Just enjoy breathing. It's an enjoyable thing. It really is when you focus on it. And when you realize the power you have in just calm breathing, not forced, just calm, and focus on it. Just focus on nothing else. Focus on how nice it feels to breathe. It's a wonderful thing. I did this with my friend on the weekend. He came over and we had our first LSD trip together, and he was getting anxiety and they come up, and I just said, put your hand on your heart. He said, yep. I said, do you feel it beating fast? He said, yes. And then I told him about the breathing. I said, well, just breathe. You're in control. Your breath is fully in control, and you can control your mind even through your breathing by trying to blanket the best you can. Bring yourself to present, but then just breathe. Bring yourself into control through your breath. It's an amazing thing when you learn to do it. You really can do it. It's quite amazing. So there's that aspect to the breathing. And the other thing is, again, just through the contemplation is, yes, you just need to contemplate. You need to spend time reading things. I said I highly recommend reading the Stoic philosophy, or if you're not into reading, there's a lot of that online, and I might even put a few links below, which are very easy things to listen to, interesting too, which you might find particularly interesting, and it might give yourself an interest in philosophy. But I'm going to leave the video here, and if you have any of your own comments about what you've done to help with anxiety, please leave them in the comments below, so it may help someone else. That's what this channel is really about, is through using, well, aspect was using psychedelics, particularly LSD, to help with things and explore myself and help with my depression. But there's also using philosophy helped tremendously too, because I don't think the LSD by itself would have done that, and it really is trying to work out the psychology of myself. Yeah, I hope this video has been enjoyable for people. I look forward to hearing any comments below.